Iran launches a barrage of ballistic missile strikes in Israel in retaliation for Israeli attacks targeting Iranian nuclear sites, generals, and scientists. President Trump says he knew Israel's plans. His top advisors watched the assault from the Situation Room. What is the next move for the U.S.? And as we head to the weekend, we go to a bar to find out why Gen Z is allergic to open bar tabs. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. Israel and Iran are now engaged what both call, and all visible evidence confirms, an all-out war. Late today, Israel was under siege from a ballistic missile assault. Israel says 21 people were injured. 2 were in serious condition. The country's air defenses are at maximum alert, intercepting what they can. As sirens wail, civilians have been ordered in and out of bomb shelters. Israel has vowed to continue its aerial assault on Iran, nuclear facilities, key military personnel. Some top Iranian military leaders and scientists have already been killed. The U.S. is not participating in the Israeli strikes inside Iran, but U.S. Navy vessels are in the region and are positioning to assist Israel, and U.S. land and sea assets have helped intercept Iranian missiles headed toward Israel. U.S. military forces, we should also note, in Iraq and Syria are on alert. President Trump made clear today he knew what Israel was planning. He said Iran should make a deal ending its pursuit of a nuclear weapon or suffer more than it already has. By way of response, Iran canceled planned talks with the U.S. this weekend and said its military would leave Israel, quote, helpless. Former Army General H.R. McMaster, once a national security advisor to President Trump, will join me momentarily. But first, I want to go to Willie James Inman at the White House. Willie James, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. Run down the day for us at the White House. There was a lot of read-in knowledge on this and some minimal response.
Yeah, that's right, Major. We first saw the president respond early this morning on Truth Social, as you perfectly laid out, essentially calling on Iran to accept a deal or that more damage and destruction would come, of course, via Israel. Now, it's important to also point out that the U.S. says that it was not involved in this attack, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in a statement released late last night via the White House, warned Iran not to strike U.S. personnel or assets in the region. And as you mentioned, U.S. troops on high alert in both Syria and Iraq as well. Bases there locked down, those troops going into a bunker for about an hour and then being released out of that bunker shortly after they were given the all-clear signal to do so. But those U.S. assets in the region helping thwart these missiles from Israel. We, of course, know that Israel and the United States are close allies, the U.S. providing a hefty amount of assistance, military assistance, to Israel to help defend itself. But in this case, the United States not green-lighting, the president not green-lighting this attack on Iran from Israel. And, of course, we saw that response play out in real time on our TV screens earlier today. We have yet to hear from the president on Truth Social or White House officials here. We do know, of course, that the president met with his national security team behind closed doors, and I just checked a moment ago. The Marine is stationed outside the West Wing, so presumably the president is in the Oval Office as of now, Major.
Willie James Inman at the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I want to turn now to Sam Vinograd, forgive me, national security contributor here at CBS News. Talk to me about how this played out in terms of evaluating Israeli intelligence inside Iran.
Well, Major, I've worked with Israeli intelligence, the Mossad as well, particularly when it comes to Iran. And let me tell you this, intelligence operations just don't happen overnight. And there is reporting in the Times of Israel and elsewhere that really speaks to the fact that this operation inside of Iran was months, if not years, in the works. Mossad, for example, yesterday evening, assassinated top nuclear scientists. There were Mossad operatives on the ground that engaged in these assassinations. There were Mossad operatives on the ground that helped launch drones from inside Iran to strike targets. And so what that tells us is that this operation was being planned for a long time. Sources were cultivated, and somehow the Mossad was able to do all of this under the radar of Iran's own intelligence services. So this is a black eye to Iranian intelligence, while also this operation served to actually damage Iranian capabilities.
The Israeli assumption is right now Iran is vulnerable. It has lost proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Syrian regime. And this penetration, intelligence penetration of Iran would also suggest it's vulnerable even beyond the way the map makes it look vulnerable.
Yes, and as you may recall, Israel launched other assassinations within Iran over the past year. So it's very clear that Iranian intelligence just can't keep up with the Mossad, and that senior Iranian officials, top military brass, top nuclear scientists, are all accessible targets to Israeli intelligence. At the same time, Israel's last strike several months ago took out Iranian air defense systems. What that means in layman's terms is that Iran has less capability to defend against missiles. So on many fronts, Iran is vulnerable. Israel is not sitting back on its heels. However, Israel is activating its own air defense system to try to protect against an Iranian response. Israel is very much expecting that Iran is going to up the ante and try to hurt Israel as much as Israel has hurt Iran.
What should we watch for in the next 48, 72 hours?
Well, we should watch to see whether Iran actually tries to target U.S. assets, both overseas in the Middle East, in Israel, in other parts of Europe, for example, or even here in the homeland. In my experience, within our own borders, Iran could choose to activate proxies to strike targets in the U.S. if Iran thinks that the U.S. was actively involved in this operation. We know that the U.S. did provide support to Israel intercepting Iranian missiles striking Israel. What we don't really know yet, Major, is whether the U.S. was involved in Israel's strike against Iran in some capacity.
It would be an enormous risk for Iran to strike out at the United States at this particular moment, would it not?
It would, although sometimes Iran denies culpability. They activate their proxies. A proxy is really someone that's not directly
traceable.
Yes, and loosely affiliated with the Iranian regime. Iran could activate its proxies and say, we didn't have full control over this. When I was in Iraq, they did that all the time, using their proxies there. And so Iran could seek to activate its proxies or to activate some kind of cyber attack against the U.S. and deny culpability, just to send a message to the United States to back off and not support Israel in this endeavor.
Sam Vinograd, great to have you here at the family table.
Thank you
so much for joining us. I appreciate it. You know, folks, we've talked about this set being a kind of movable feast. I kind of think of it as an apartment with lots of moving parts. We're going to move them right now. Inja and Holly, my excellent stage crew, is doing that right now. H.R. McMaster, you see on the touch screen, he joins us from Stanford University's Hoover Institution. H.R., thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad you're with us, particularly on this day. Two questions. First, evaluate what Israel has done. Evaluate the Iranian response such as we know it.
Hey, Major, it's great to be with you. And, well, I think what Israel's done is actually phenomenal in terms of the performance of Israeli intelligence and the IDF. And Sam nailed it. I mean, this is an operation, I'm sure, that was at least 2 years in the making to put into place the kind of infrastructure that allowed Israel to just track some of these key leaders in real time, leaders who were relevant to the nuclear program and Israel's efforts to set back the nuclear program, as well as leaders who were relevant to what Iran might do in response and to cripple that capability. In regard to your second question, I think what we have to watch is exactly what as you and Sam were discussing, which is, does Iran does Iran choose to strike U.S. assets, and as you mentioned, that would be, I think, a big risk for them based on the fundamental weakness of the Iranian regime. As you and Sam also alluded to, hey, Iran had it pretty good for decades, Major, because what they could do is use these proxies, and we obliged them kind of by acting like we didn't know what the return address is. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, the theocratic dictator in Iran, he kind of blew it last year when he authorized these direct strikes on Israel, and Israel responded with a small strike in April and then a massive strike in October of last year, taking out their air defense systems, crippling their air defense systems, and achieving the kind of freedom of action you saw with, as Sam pointed out, this astounding use, kind of like the Ukrainians did in Russia, the use of drones from deep within Iran, as well as the degree to which about 200 Israeli aircraft could fly with relative impunity and strike these large numbers of sites associated with the nuclear program and the missile program, I should say.
HR, I'm going to have our control room bring up a map for our viewers of where U.S. military forces are positioned in Iraq and Syria. It's roughly 40,000. You're pretty familiar with where they are. Do you consider them at any particular heightened risk right now?
Yeah, of course they are at a heightened risk, and I think what's really important is you saw the U.S. Department of Defense order those out of the region who aren't really necessary, who don't really need to be there from a defense capability. But I should tell you, Major, our air defenses, our missile defenses, are a heck of a lot better than they were even 5 years ago. Remember, with the attacks against the Saudi oil fields, the attacks against the Al Assad air base in 2020 after the killing of Qasem Soleimani, there have been tremendous improvements that you saw in effect in the defeat of the massive Iranian attack on Israel last year. So I think I would be confident in the ability of those forces to defend themselves, and in the ability of the U.S. military to project power in support of those small bases throughout the region. Remember back in 2017 when these Russian mercenaries and the Assad regime must have been thinking, I wonder what happens when you attack an American outpost. Is that actually in early 2018, and everything rained down on them. Because what is important to realize about the U.S. military is it is an integrated air, land, maritime, space, cyberspace capability that the United States can bring to bear.
I'm also going to have the control room bring up a map that shows where our naval assets are positioned. USS Carl Vinson, that's a carrier strike force in the Arabian Sea, 2 destroyers in the Eastern Mediterranean, 3 other destroyers, 2 in the Red Sea, 1 in the Western Mediterranean. What do those assets mean, and how do they posture us in case this thing gets even wider?
Well, they're in a position to impose severe costs on Iran if Iran does act against us. If they do try to fire, the missiles and drones that they have left, they're in a position not only with some of our advanced aircraft and radar systems to shoot down those missiles and aircraft as part of an integrated air defense effort, but also to be able to kill the archer, that's firing those kind of arrows at our forces. But also, what's important to realize so far, Major, is what hasn't been struck in Iran. What hasn't been struck are economic targets. And I think that was smart by the Israelis in the beginning, because Prime Minister Netanyahu's message to the Iranian people are, hey, look at what this theocratic dictatorship is doing to your country and the resources that they have squandered in their efforts to extend hegemonic influence in the region, to attack U.S. forces, drive us out of the region, and destroy Israel. What he did in that speech that he made is lay out an alternative path for the Iranian people. So I think in the near term, at least, it was smart not to strike targets that could worsen the plight of the Iranian people, who are destitute, many of whom are destitute because of the corruption of this regime in Tehran.
H.R. McMaster, I want you to please stay with us. You'll be with us on the other side of the break. We'll chat more when we come back. Still to come, more with H.R. McMaster on the Middle East, this weekend's Army Parade, and the National Guard in Southern California. Plus, citizenship for sale, asking price $5 million. President Trump says 15,000 have signed up for a gold card that bears his name and image. It promises a sped-up path to citizenship. And 2 boomers walk into a bar and everyone leaves. No. Actually, we're going to take a look at Gen Z's dollar-savvy bar habits. All ahead on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Continuing our conversation with H.R. McMaster, who for a time was national security advisor to President Trump in the first term. How do you think he's evaluating all this, HR, the president?
One of the many major national security
Yes.
advisors.
The running list is now
so
6.
is I think what he's doing is trying to resolve, I think, what the two opposing ideas that President Trump holds in his head about the Middle East and about Iran in particular. Of course, President Trump is very big on peace through strength. And he also recognized that, hey, Iran is the problem in the region, right? Iran has been perpetuating these proxy wars in the region, applying the Hezbollah model to the region, in which they create these militias and terrorist organizations that lay outside of government's control that can be turned against that government if that government acts against Iranian interests, right? This is what they did in Lebanon with this Hezbollah model. It's what they kind of did with Assad and propping him up with the Houthis in Yemen, and of course with this Hashd-Shabi militias group of militias in Iraq as well. And their strategy has been to kind of expend every Arab life in their effort to kick the United States out of the region, as the first step in destroying Israel and killing all the Jews. That's really what they wanted to do. President Trump understands all that. He also understands, as you've heard him say many times in the past, that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, which is very consistent with the Begin Doctrine. The Begin Doctrine is, of course, Israel's determination to ensure that a hostile or an enemy state doesn't have the most destructive weapons on earth. They acted on that doctrine the first time in 1981 with strikes against a nuclear reactor in Iraq, and again in 2007 with strikes against a nuclear reactor in Syria. Of course, what they've done in Iran is orders and orders of magnitude far beyond those strikes, and much more difficult in terms of complexity. So President Trump understands all that. But what he also has is a deep skepticism about getting more deeply involved in the Middle East. Many of his strongest supporters have used kind of this mantra of ending endless wars, and will say to him, hey, don't let Israel drag us into a war in the Middle East. So how he reconciles, I think, those two conflicting views within his own mind and within his administration, I think will help determine the outcome. I think the principal determinant, though, will be as you and Sam were talking about, which is, does Iran decide to strike out against U.S. personnel, U.S. facilities, as well as Israeli facilities? Because that makes it kind of an easy decision for President Trump,
no doubt.
that he would have to respond to that.
HR, the Army turns 250 this weekend. There's a big parade in Washington. Do you have any problem with that?
I have no problem with that. But what I don't want is, I don't want it to be politicized on a partisan from a partisan perspective. What we are celebrating is that day in the Second Continental Congress on June 14th, 1775, when John Adams, the delegate from Massachusetts, convinced his colleagues, hey, we need a Continental Army. And so they decided to raise 10 companies of riflemen to go assist the militias that were besieging Boston at the time, British-held Boston. And the next thing they decided, the next day on the 15th, was to appoint George Washington as the first commander-in-chief of that force. And what we need to do is approach this parade as George Washington approached his duties, as patriots who celebrate our army, which has fought, in a nonpartisan way to win our freedom in the War of Independence, and then to preserve our freedom since then.
But HR, there is a heavy President Trump overlay on all this. And there are those who say this is going to look like an authoritarian celebration.
It's not an authoritarian celebration. I know that the president, I'll tell you, like many other politicians, lately has been trying to drag kind of the military into partisan dialogue. I mean, some of the things he says and does, at like the speech at Fort Bragg, for example, I just want to say, God, it was a great speech until that moment when you make it a partisan issue, or in front of troops, disparage their previous commander-in-chief. So I think what Americans can do is just stress to all of our politicians, don't drag the military into partisan politics. I would say the Biden administration was pushing a radical social agenda on the military. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth are applying a corrective to that But hey, let's make sure that the cure is not worse than the disease.
Hmm.
So keep that bold line in place because, wouldn't it be terrible if our military was infected, with the same kind of vitriol and division that we see in other institutions? We can't afford it because you know
Right.
what? Those kind of divisions are inimical to combat effectiveness. In our army,
Right.
we judge the soldier next to us based on their toughness, their courage, their sense of honor, their discipline. I don't care what their political affiliation is. I don't care what their identity category is.
Right.
And that's what we have to make sure we preserve.
HR, there are National Guard in Los Angeles against the wishes of the mayor and the governor and the United States Marines. Excessive or appropriate?
I think appropriate in this case, Major. I would say maybe not the Marines who aren't trained for this, but when you had the incidents that we've all read about, which is the threats to federal officers, the threats to federal sites, that is well within the president's purview to protect those personnel and to protect those sites. I think what's regrettable about this situation is California is a sanctuary state. Los Angeles is a sanctuary city, and what we're talking about is really enforcing the law. And it's regrettable that this federalization of the National Guard had to happen. But I think in this case, it's appropriate. I would say unless the Marine Corps are absolutely needed, they're not really trained for this mission set. For the National Guard, I think it's completely appropriate. There's a lot of disinformation out there, Major. You're not going to have National Guard making arrests. They may have to temporarily detain somebody who's a threat, but there has been no activation of posse comitatus or any kind of martial law. It should be the National Guard working hand in hand. But sadly, the leadership within the state of California and in Los Angeles have made it kind of their own policy and their own law to not adhere to federal laws and enforce them.
HR McMaster, I appreciate the time, sir, very much. Thank you.
Great to be with you, Major.
And here's an invitation. Join me tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Eastern, for live coverage of the Army's 250th anniversary parade right here in Washington. You'll see it on CBS News 24/7. Democrats trying to be the next mayor of New York City spar on stage, at least rhetorically, what the frontrunners had to say. That's next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. And happy Friday, by the way. Here's a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. Tariff anxiety, to the degree it's out there, just might be receding. Consumer sentiment surged 16% this month. That's according to numbers released today by the University of Michigan. This is the first improvement in that gauge since December. Now, despite the uptick in sentiment, the stock market stumbled as oil prices rose in response to hostilities in the Middle East. We'll have more from Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady in just a bit. Kilmar Obrego Garcia has pled not guilty to human trafficking charges. A Salvadoran man who was wrongly deported to El Salvador and then returned to the United States to face federal prosecution. The government alleges he participated in a conspiracy to traffic undocumented migrants into the country. An appeals court has ruled that President Trump can keep the California National Guard deployed in Los Angeles, at least for now. The decision blocks a lower federal court judge's earlier ruling that returned control of the troops to the state government. 2,100 National Guard members are working in Los Angeles in response to recent immigration protests and violence that broke out surrounding them. Democrats vying to be the next mayor of New York City clashed in their second and final primary debate Thursday night. The two frontrunners, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and State Assemblyman Zoran Mamdani, sparred over their records, qualifications, and the importance of getting a name right.
To put a person in this seat at this time with no experience is reckless and dangerous.
To Mr. Cuomo, I have never had to resign in disgrace. And furthermore, the name is Mamdani, M-A-M-D-A-N-I. You should learn how to say it.
Here now, Punchbowl News congressional reporter Max Cohen, political White House reporter Sophia Kai, and CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. Nicole, it's great to have you here at the family table the first time on the brand new Takeout. Talk to me about what's most on your mind about what you saw on the Hill this week.
Well, gosh, I don't know where to start.
It's a long list. It's a long list. You're under no pressure, Nicole.
I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about the big, beautiful bill, but I would say things are very ugly in terms of the family dynamics on Capitol Hill right now. I think we saw things really explode as both the House and Senate broke for this week as a result of this forceful removal of California Senator Alex Padilla. You know,
From a press conference involving the DHS Secretary Kristi Noem.
Correct. Yeah, things just really ignited. You know, you have Democrats who are furious over what happened. There was a shouting match on the House floor. You know, there was a hearing yesterday on sanctuary cities that also erupted, but, you know, this all kind of erupted simultaneously. But I think the catalyst in part was this treatment of Senator Padilla. So, of course, again, we have heard from a lot of congressional Democrats on this, many of whom have tried to meet with Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson, whether that is members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Black Caucus, members of the California delegation, unsuccessfully. You know, Speaker Mike Johnson himself told me that he thinks that Padilla's behavior rises to the level of censure, to which House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar told me shortly thereafter that he thinks the Speaker is full of it. So I think that gives you a sense of just the dynamics and the tenor right now on Capitol Hill. And certainly we have heard from Senator Padilla explaining that he was just trying to ask a question of the Secretary, but I don't think this is an issue that is going to go away when lawmakers return next week.
We have a soundbite on this very topic from Alaska Republican Lisa Murkowski. Let's listen.
I worry about our government being viewed as this heavy-handed authoritarian state where anybody can be thrown to the floor and put in handcuffs.
Is that where we're at right now?
If we were sitting down day before yesterday and had this conversation, we would both say that would never happen. It wouldn't happen. And so it confuses me.
That's from an upcoming episode of CBS Sunday Morning, June 22nd. Nora O'Donnell with Lisa Murkowski. Max, it's also something on your mind, something you've been reporting about, this edginess on Capitol Hill, particularly over the Padilla incident.
Certainly. I think that it shows the tension that many lawmakers are feeling right now. Congressional Democrats were furious after they saw the footage, and they took to the Senate floor. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said he needs answers immediately, called it a, quote, manhandling of a sitting United States senator. But it also shows Republicans there, like Lisa Murkowski, are increasingly pushing back against some of the Trump administration actions. And we're seeing that on a variety of issues, not only with Padilla, but also with regards to reconciliation, like Nicole just mentioned. So
how is that manifesting itself on the reconciliation bill, the budget bill, the economic agenda? It has many different names.
Sure. A lot of fiscal conservatives on the far right of the Senate Republican Conference are saying this bill does not do enough to cut spending. So we hear a lot how the Republican Party is firmly united around Donald Trump. And while that's true for the most part, we're seeing in this instance folks like Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, Mike Lee, Rick Scott, all hardline Republicans saying, I'm not comfortable voting for this bill unless we cut more spending.
Max, from your assessment, and I know we're sort of in the middle of this process, that's four would sink it. Are those hard no's or sort of no's?
I think we have Rand Paul as a almost certain no. I'd say the rest are still very much in play. And the White House is interfacing with those other more in play no's because they know if you don't get this bill passed, which includes a debt limit increase, that might be fiscal disaster.
Sophia, the White House perspective on all this.
Look, they got called into the principal's office.
Who did?
You've got Rick Scott.
Okay. Florida Republican.
You've got Ron Johnson.
Wisconsin Republican.
You know, and all of the fiscal hawks, right? There's four of them already. Max mentioned Rand Paul is a hard no because, you know, he doesn't want to raise the debt ceiling.
Right.
So now there's three more. And you've also got to consider the moderates. So, you know, someone like Susan Collins, someone like Josh Hawley, who doesn't like other parts of the bill, like changes to Medicaid. Medicaid. So you've got to consider all of that. And I think what you have is really high White House engagement saying, look, we'll talk to you. You know, we'll consider some changes. We might put your pet projects in the bill. In exchange, don't be so negative on it. So you're seeing some of that with the temperature come down from those fiscal hawks. And really, the action is all going to the Hill and the Senate. You know, the Senate's going to take up reconciliation. And then after that, Thune is going to want to pass the rescissions package,
Right.
the $9 billion rescissions that starts to codify a portion of those Doge cuts.
Right, exactly. So when we live in Washington, we are somehow always fascinated by who the mayor of New York City is. Does anyone have any comments on the future of that race? You're under no obligation. If nobody has anything, we'll move on. We're going to move on. All right. Nicole, talk to me about the Russia sanctions package that has been sitting there waiting for a green light from the White House. Lindsey Graham has said publicly there are 82 co-sponsors. Any chance that moves?
He seems pretty optimistic that he would like to see a vote next week. That is something that Senator Blumenthal, who has also co-sponsored this package, has also expressed an interest in doing. In terms of the leadership sources that I've talked to, there is nothing on the calendar just yet. So there is not a commitment as of yet to move it forward, but certainly the momentum is taking it that way. There seems to be broad bipartisan support to try to advance this package in light of the situation, happening on the ground with respect to Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, this issue now that's flaring up between Israel and Iran is now top of mind, too. But, there is hope that that sanctions package for Russia could move forward.
Sophia, the president said earlier this week that 15,000 people have signed up for the gold card, $5 million, for some sort of expedited path to citizenship. No real details provided.
Yes.
And those who signed up on the website, as I understand it, didn't have to prove they had the money to pay. They just signed up. So this is all kind of amorphous.
It's sort of like express your interest, right? And by the way, tell us which country you're from.
Tell us which country you're from and do something that we can talk about, a card with the president's likeness on it.
I mean, look, I think
That's called gold.
That's called
All
gold.
fits. Very on the nose. Very on the
The Golden Dome, the gold card, all things gold are good if you're
Golden
President
age,
Donald
so
Trump.
on and so forth.
But I think this is a mechanism that they're trying to use to, for Trump, bring international people who are very wealthy and who could potentially spend money on American businesses, American workers, and at the same time potentially reduce the deficit. So already the White House is saying we've got 15,000 people signed up. Secretary Lutnick is saying that if 200,000 people sign up, that could potentially be $1 trillion. But look,
if they pay.
If they pay, and if this thing holds up in court, which we don't know, it's very possible that Congress will have to approve this. And, anything immigration related on Congress is a big question mark.
Max, I was going to go to you, but the people in the control room, they're very insistent that I go to break. I apologize for that. Max Cohen, Sophia Kai, Nicole Killian, thank you so much. Which camera? Okay, Guy, thank you very much. Tensions in the Middle East sent ripples through the stock markets here. We're tracking the impact of all that next here on the Takeout. Welcome back. Stocks lost ground on Wall Street. All major indices down 1% or more as traders kept a very close eye on what's happening between Israel and Iran. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins me now for analysis. So, Kelly, let's start with the effect the ongoing battle between Israel and Iran has had on world oil markets.
Oh, well, I mean, you saw oil prices spike at one point 10% versus last night. I think we landed about 8%. But this is really a supply and demand thing. This is simple economics. Go back to your college class. When you have the same amount of demand, but potentially less supply, that means prices are going to go up. Iran, it is a top 10 oil producer. They have the ability to block and have warned they might do that in the past. The Strait of Hormuz, that is where 30% of the world's oil goes through. And so investors are looking at the situation going, wow, if a bomb goes off and hits an oil refinery over there, or Iran does decide to block that, you could see a supply issue. And I go back to what happened when Russia attacked Ukraine. Back summer 2022, you saw oil prices hit above $100 a barrel. And then you saw gas prices hit above $5 a gallon. And that flowed through to inflation. And that was all because of this concern about supply. And that's why prices went up. People are worried that's going to happen again here.
So just to take one step down the road, summer's a busy travel season. There could be implications for prices at the pump and jet fuel to put us on airplanes.
Absolutely. You could see gas prices go up. And that effect, by the way, when you see oil prices rise, it trickles within a few weeks. Now, we're nowhere near the numbers that we were at summer of 2022. But by the way, it's not just gas prices and jet fuel. It is diesel prices, and that is very important because what do trucks run on? How do your groceries get to the grocery store? How do your Amazon packages get to the warehouse? It is diesel prices. And when that goes up, that is why we call it the canary in the coal mine when it comes to inflation. Your inflation potential goes up. Remember summer 2022? What happened to inflation? We hit 9%. That was partially because of oil prices.
Kelly, what did we learn, if anything, from the consumer sentiment numbers?
So this was a bright spot, actually, that really got lost in all of this news today. Consumers are feeling better. That doesn't mean they're not still concerned about their finances and trade policy and what's to come. But we actually saw consumer sentiment see levels that we haven't seen in quite some time. It's still negative, but it hit above 60. And it was mainly because people are feeling more comfortable about trade deals getting done. The thing that was, this is a preliminary reading. I'm very curious when this final reading for June comes out at the end of the month, because then that will include what happened today and what may happen over the next few days. And obviously, a conflict in the Middle East, that's going to put a dampening on consumer sentiment.
Kelly, when we talked back when this was America Decides around Liberation Day, before and immediately after, there was tremendous conversation and kind of a consensus sense that it would be destabilizing, create volatility, and probably in the very near term, higher prices. The White House keeps saying, not happening. What I said, meaning the president, that this would not necessarily have an inflationary impact, has proven true. Too early to declare that victory?
I do think it's too early to declare the victory because we do know that they have collected a lot of tariff revenue, tens of billions of dollars. It's going to be really hard for at least some of that to not trickle down to consumers. Businesses had to pay that out. But we are seeing less of a tariff impact than we originally expected, and that is something that we're taking heart in. The oil prices thing that we just talked about, though, that creates a total wild card that I don't think anyone saw coming, and that's going to be really important to track over the next few months. And another reason why the Federal Reserve next week is going to hold interest rates steady.
Quickly, Kelly, about 30 seconds. What are we seeing in jobs numbers?
We're seeing a slowing job market. We're seeing people take longer to find a new job, but we haven't gone off a cliff, and that's heartening to see.
Always a pleasure. Kelly O'Grady breaks everything down for us every single time, never misses a pitch. Kelly O'Grady, thanks so much. Have a great weekend. Keeping tabs on how Gen Z is changing bar culture. That's next here on The Takeout.
According to the New York Times, Gen Z, when they go to the bar, they don't open a tab and just leave it open until they leave. They buy a drink, pay for it, close the tab.
Welcome back. We love podcasts here. For those of you familiar with The Takeout, you know podcasts are kind of our source code. And we also like a little bit of cross-podcast pollination. What you just saw, that was from Bloomberg's Everybody's Business podcast. As you heard, Gen Z, to be specific, those born between 1997 and 2012, as you heard, don't like to open a bar tab when they drink with their friends. We wanted to learn why. So we traveled to a bar in College Park, Maryland, home of the University of Maryland, and sat down with Michael McMillan, professor of business there.
At first, I was a little bit disturbed by that, but I was also heartened by it. Why? Because it means that Gen Z is concerned about how much money they are spending when they go out. One of the things we talk about when it comes to budgeting is you can go out, you can spend money, you can shop. The purpose of a budget is to control how much you're spending when you do go out. And that's why I think many Gen Zers are not opening a bar tab. Think about it. You start drinking at 8 o'clock in the evening and people come in and yes, I'll have another beer, yes, I'll have a drink. And before you know it, that $50 that you allotted to go out to enjoy yourself has now morphed into $150 because you didn't realize how much you were drinking. You didn't realize that other people, you'd say, yeah, have a drink, put it on my tab. So by opening a bar tab or just buying drinks by drinks, you are keeping track of how much you're spending. And I think that's a good thing.
Is it also part of their own familiarity with individualized transactions? Meaning they can do it on their phone and that's how they buy almost everything else, and that familiarity is now a pattern.
Yes, that's a really good idea, really good thought, and I hadn't thought about that before. But when I go out and eat or whatever, I don't keep the bill open. I know how much I'm ordering, and then I get a bill, and that's how much I pay for it. But when it comes to borrowing money from someone, how do I pay them back? With my phone. Almost everything you do now, you're right, is with your phone.
Except for me, I still use either cash or a debit card. I almost never go to the supermarket and whip out my phone and pay it that way. I still do all the other mechanics that I did 30 years ago, either cash or a card of some kind. But Gen Z, they are completely ingrained in the phone transactional world.
And also with no touch of money whatsoever.
There's kind of an allergy among Gen Zers in that space.
Yes, you know what amazed me is after COVID, there were stores that said, we are short on change, or we are short. And I'm thinking, who pays with money anymore? Don't you just use a credit card or whatever? Yes, yeah, very much so. Who writes a check?
I still keep a fair amount of cash in my pocket.
Major, I think you're old-fashioned.
Very old-fashioned, very old-fashioned. Does this present problems for bartenders or bars?
I think it does, because rather than keep having one transaction over an evening with one customer, you may have 5 separate transactions with that same customer over an evening. So I think it is a problem for bartenders, because you're constantly opening up a bill, closing it, opening up, closing, rather than just doing it once in the evening.
And I've read there's a transaction fee that establishments have to pay for the use of a credit card.
Exactly, exactly. Every transaction, it's 3%, 5%, whatever they're charging.
So that comes out of their bottom line every time there's a transaction.
It may come out of their bottom line, but what I've also found...
Or it gets passed on to the customer.
Exactly. Many businesses now, when you go in, they'll say, we will charge you an additional 3% or 1% if you choose to use your credit card. Me, as an accounting professor, that means I go and get cash because I don't want to spend the additional 3% when I could just get some cash and pay for it.
And to your earlier point, those customers who transact one at a time, one drink at a time, aren't having that, my budget's $50, suddenly blow up to $150, which benefits the bar.
Yes, very, very much so. You know, and one of the things we stress is that a budget is a positive vehicle, not a negative one.
It's not an act of denialism.
No, it's a license. It's a license to spend money. This is how much money you can go and blow and do whatever you want to do. So again, $50 I can go out and spend. But I don't want to get a bill at the end of the evening of $150, $175, because now I've blown my budget.
Well, that does it for this week of the Takeout Week 3. If you're keeping track at home, if you missed anything at all, have no fear. It all exists on CBSNews.com, podcast platforms, and the Takeout playlist on YouTube. Get caught up on my conversations with Cameron Mofid, one of the youngest people to visit every country, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise at the Congressional Ball Game, and Customs and Border Protection Senior Advisor Ron Vitello, and so much more. Stick around. The Daily Report is coming up next on CBS News 24/7, and if you're curious, this is Black Coffee. We'll see you Monday.